So, back with the release of Path of Fire, the second expansion, the devs kind of dumped all the elite specializations on us at once, and I did a video series called Introducing, where I said, Introducing the Soul Beast. And we got in, and we played the Soul Beast, we looked at every animation of every skill, we looked at the traits, we kind of did our first impressions, and then we moved on. Those Introducing videos were really fun to make, and actually very successful as well. I want to do for future expansions, if and where possible. But it got me thinking about Heart of Thorns, the first expansion, where I didn't do anything like that. The devs trickled the information out much more slowly back then, and so I did have a lot of content about it, but never one big summarized video explaining everything there is to know about those specific elite specs. So in the name of a little series that I've been wondering if I should do for a while, I'm going to take the plunge and do it. I know many of us at the time of this video coming out are more than familiar with the Reaper, which is today's topic, but nonetheless, I still want to talk about it. And hey, because we've had 2 years with this thing, now 3 years with this thing, you know, it's really settled into a nice place trait and balance-wise, and we can probably give some better discussion than just that first week. So, introducing the Reaper. You can see I'm currently playing it right now. We're all geared up with Reaper stuff. We've got Reaper utilities on, Reaper weapons. We're going to go through all of it. The Reaper is the first elite specialization that was added to the Necromancer class. So you can see here in my elite spec slot, we have Reaper. There was a description and a trailer for this that went up originally when the devs were talking about it way back when. I'll read that out for you so you get an idea. An irreducible force on the battlefield, the Reaper empowers itself enough to wield a cleaving greatsword to harvest its foes. Slow and hard-hitting, these deadly combatants call out for the impending doom of their enemies with piercing shouts. Upon accumulating sufficient life force, they can enter the Reaper's Shroud, a deadly form that grants them a dark scythe of malevolent energy and the abilities to match it. Capable of heavily afflicting their victims with chill and other conditions, the Reaper wades into melee, receiving and dealing blows, knowing nothing can save its foes. So, that should give you a good idea. In terms of game mechanics, really the Reaper is about melee-oriented pressure. Its special weapon is a greatsword with largely melee-oriented skills, though some of them have a little bit of range, we'll deal with in a second. And its special profession mechanic, which changes our Death Shroud into Reaper's Shroud, also is very much melee-oriented, though again, you know, there's some distance you can get with some of the abilities, like the skill 5 here. You know, I managed to hit all the way over there, but it's still kind of a melee-oriented set. So Reaper has many ways to catch up with its opponents, but specifically as well, it's got a lot to do with chill, and the idea is that it's kind of a horrific movie monster that's constantly chasing after you, keeping you crippled and slowed and incapacitated as it meat grinds you up. Recently, as I make this video, it's had buff after buff after buff, and in my humble opinion, Reaper is actually the best open world living story elite specialization in the game. This thing is a powerhouse that's so sturdy and sustaining, can deal with pretty much anything it likes. It's also extremely powerful right now in PvP, and while it can find usage in many other places, those are the two areas that I think this really shines right now. And for those reasons, it's pretty much good for any kind of PvE player, just because it is king of the most well-played domain of the game, that is open world and living world and so on. So looking at the gear here, what you can see is it's with the Heart of Thorns expansion, and that's where we're filming this video. The gear I'm wearing is actually core gear. This is Orion stuff. This is from the Ara dungeon. But the headpiece is the Reaper's headpiece. This is called the Reaper's hood. I think maybe Reaper's cowl. Let's have a quick look here. The Reaper's hood. And as for the weapon, this greatsword here is the Reaper's weapon. It's called Dark Harvest. This is what you get for finishing all your Reapery things within Heart of Thorns and finishing that elite specialization off. So the stuff isn't dyed. I've deliberately kept it all vanilla so that you guys can see. You know, you could dye this all black and little shades of red in there, green, whatever you like to do. But yeah, so that's kind of the visual styling it's got. And let's deal with the various mechanics, I guess. Starting off, first of all, with Reaper's Shroud, which is our new F1. So as a core Necromancer, obviously you can press F1 and it changes your 5 skills. Well, it's the same concept here. You press F1 and it changes your 5 skills. But now, when you enter Shroud, the 5 skills you get are going to be completely different. They still function with all the different Shroud-oriented traits you'll be familiar with as you are climbing to 80. but the way that the skills themselves deliver those traits has now changed. So in order to show it to you all, I actually need to get some life force, so give me a second. Just before I go in, let's mouse over the initial traits. You'll see it's called Shroud Knight, and it describes itself as this. Death Shroud is replaced with Reaper's Shroud, which has more melee-oriented skills and consumes life force at a faster rate. You also gain access to shouts, which we'll talk about in a second. So the big fundamental difference here is attribute-wise and stuff, this doesn't necessarily have to change you. But it means that when you are in Shroud, using Shroud as your health instead, you actually drain really quickly. This is a fairly new aspect of Reaper. When it originally released, it never had this. But the idea is that's the trade-off you make for getting access to such big pressure. And so, yeah, we're not going to get too long to be able to show our skills off here. But let's do it. So moving into Shroud, there's a beautiful animation. I still remember when the devs were first showing this. We become kind of this black, frosty-looking character with this big scythe. And the idea is that these are actually all scythe abilities we're now using here. You get kind of the dark eyes here. The armor you're wearing underneath does actually change. So there's all different kinds of ways you can look as a Reaper in this Shroud. But the distinctive thing about this really is the giant scythe that comes up. And then when you leave, it all dissipates again before your very eyes. Alright, with the visuals established, and they are very cool, aren't they? If I don't sound too excited, it's probably just because I'm, you know, very used to them by now. With the visuals excited, let's start talking about the skills by moving a bit more into the jungle so we've actually got people we can hit. So for the auto attack, there's a couple of things to establish. For core Necromancer, when you use your auto in Shroud, it's like a pellet that gets fired out, and it doesn't chain into anything else. It's just a pellet, and then a pellet, and then a pellet, and a pellet. For Reaper, you're going to see that our auto attacks actually become chains. A bit like Scepter main hand, right? You auto, and then the second auto is actually slightly different, and then the third one's slightly auto, slightly different and it resets. It's the same for Shroud here. So the idea is, in core Necromancer, when you press skill 4 in Shroud, that's a skill that brings your life force back. Remember, it's called life transfer, and you can use that to kind of heal yourself in Shroud. Well, for Reaper, that idea of regenerating life force while already in Shroud, that is no longer on the skill 4, it's on the autos, on these chains. So that's kind of the principle at work here. Unfortunately, there was a big husk I was going to show you guys this damage on, and some player has come along and killed it before my very eyes now. So here, we'll come to Heart of the Mist and show it off on the indestructible target golem. So we go into Shrouds. We've got our auto. It's called Life Rend. Then it's Life Slash, and then Reap. Rend slash Reap. Rend slash Reap. And if you look at my life force here, you'll see it's degenerating, as you'd expect, and faster than normal. But it's chunking up every third auto attack. This also cleaves, all right? So the auto attack for regular Necromancer could cleave too. You know, it could pierce through different people. But for this one, if you manage to cleave, that accelerates the life force gain. So if you're able to hit 3 targets at once, you can stay in Shroud like really, really easily, as long as all you're really doing is autoing. And the autos hit very hard, because what you do is each swing of your scythe, you're reaping all 3 people. It's a lot like the Dervish played in Guild Wars 1 with its scythe that would cleave through 3 people. So for skill 2, thankfully, we don't need enemies really to demonstrate. Skill 2 is called Death's Charge, which was an assassin ability from Guild Wars 1. As you'll see here, it says, slide forwards, destroying projectiles in your path, blind foes where you land, and it inherits traits from your skill 2 normal stuff. So what does this mean? Well, we kind of helicopter forward. It's a beautiful skill. It moves you 600 range. It's a leap finisher. You spin the scythe around in front of you, which, yes, blocks projectiles. And the most prominent thing about that is that's your big gap close. The thing with Reaper is, and Necro in general, is kind of a movement inhibited class. It doesn't have that much to get around. You know, you've got Spectral Walk, you've got Flesh Worm, which you can obviously take on a Reaper to, you know, spike around. You could maybe teleport to your Flesh Worm and then immediately Shroud and stuff. But it was really important that Reaper, as a very melee-oriented class, did have something to close gaps. And it's actually really strong just because of that one skill. You can kind of keep up with a lot of stuff, and you know, I actually think in terms of flavor of where the class should be, it might even be a little bit overpowered. But yeah, really, really powerful, super low cooldown as you saw there as well. I'll show you what it looks like when we hit an enemy with it. So here we have this giant beetle. We go into Shrouds, And when we land, you can see we did about 5,000 damage to him, blinded him. He tried to attack us and knock us over there, but the blinds stopped him from being able to do that. It actually does damage constantly, and then a big tick at the end, I think, is the way that it runs. And you can quite often use that to run away from an engagement or get into something. Most of the time when you go into Shroud, you're going to start with a skill 2. Just like that, and then you're going to start autoing to keep yourself in. And look, we just killed the beetle there with the obscene damage we have. So you'll hopefully remember that the skill 3 on regular Necro is a targeted instant fear. Well, once again, the skill 3 will fear for a Reaper, but it does something extra too. If you're a melee-oriented build, yes, you need some kind of gap close and escape, definitely. But another thing that's super useful, especially in the competitive modes, and increasingly so as PvE becomes more complex and interesting, is stability. Stability being another thing that Necros never really had great access to. Well, Reaper gets it very comfortably in its Shroud. So let's have a look. Skill 3, Infusing Terror. Shroud yourself with dark armor that grants stability and reduces incoming damage. So check it out. We press 3, we get this effect on us now, and we get this big, like, pillar of black darkness over us. So for as long as we hold that, 20% reduced damage is really good, and the stability is also really good. So, you know, for a lot of times in PvE, you don't really care too much about the stab, but it's a very comfortable, easy thing to do, to go into Shroud and then immediately give yourself Infusing Terror, give yourself the dark armor, and not only can you unload lots of damage while you're in Shroud, but you're now a little bit tankier in there too. Obviously has synergies with that core death magic trait that increases your toughness while in Shroud and so on. So I'll show you that, guys, that again, because there's another side of the skill to talk about, and that is that you can shatter it. Here's the description. You may shatter this armor to fear foes around you. So what I can do here is tap it again to use Terrify. Detonate your armor to make foes around you flee in fear. And you see this big fear icon we get above our head? That's the same fear icon that you get in Downstate and what it looked like when you were using the fear in Core Shroud. So it is a lot stronger than the Core Shroud skill 3, but Core Shroud skill 3 can fear from far away. If I was a regular Necromancer right now, I could fear this beetle. But as a Reaper, it's only in a splash around you, which means that if you really want that fear value, you have to get in close, all right? It's also not instant activation. Also, when you shatter the armor, it does get rid of your damage reduction. The stability may roll on you for a little bit longer, but the damage reduction will go away straight away. So you want to be careful to not use that too liberally. A lot of Necromancers kind of double tap and they just spam the fear super fast. Quite often what I like to do is go into Shroud, use Death's Charge to blind whatever I'm fighting. Then after blinding them, and you get the value out of that, then maybe use your stability and your dark armor once you're in there. It's instant. There's no cast on actually creating the armor. You can do it in the middle of anything else. So you should always try to use it when you go in Shroud. That's the first 3 skills. Moving on to skill 4, which is a real powerhouse of damage, let me tell you. We have Soul Spiral. So spin and damage nearby foes, inflicting poison on each strike. So here's what it looks like. We spin and spin and spin. Now, this may not look very impressive. You know, Death's Charge is pretty cool with the spinning as well. But I'll tell you, Soul Spiral is mental. First of all, it's a well. So if you can create any kind of field at your feet, like maybe a well, right? As a Necromancer, you should be familiar with these. While spinning in it, you will create life-leeching bolts, and several of them. But also, it just does extremely heavy damage. I'll show you what it looks like on an enemy here. Let's go for this veteran beetle, all right? This veteran will be way, way tankier than the other ones. We're going to go into Shroud here, and we're going to use Soul Spiral. All right, so this doesn't look too good, but look, we got 15k damage there on him. And now I'm going to auto to sustain my Shroud as long as possible by life reaping both of the beetles. Hopefully we get... Okay, so we're not going to get Soul Spiral back. It's a long cooldown, but it's a really, really heavy hitter. A seriously heavy hitter. The other thing about it as well is by delivering that poison, that means if you're playing in, like, the competitive PvP modes... I'll talk about this other stuff I did there in a moment. If you're playing in the competitive modes, that poison reduces the ability for your enemies to resurrect one another. You might wonder, okay, if this is all about flat damage rather than condition damage, which largely you can say Reaper is, why would you care about poison? It's because poison reduces the amount that enemies can heal. Once again, let's come over to this beetle here. Newly into Shrouds. And you see how we just chunk him down like that? One skill, and he's dead. 15,000 damage. And that's not even, you know, with a lot of other trait augments and stuff. That's just with respect to the rest of this video here. So, really, really strong stuff. Next and last of all, let's look once again at the 5. I used that earlier for you all. It's called Executioner's Scythe. Deliver a powerful overhead hand strike to stun a single target, dealing increased damage the lower their health is, and it also leaves an ice field. I wanted to use it as well there, not just read the tooltip for you guys. So here's what it looks like. We're going to slam it down. It has a big wind-up, so you can be interrupted. You want to make sure you've got Infusing Terror up already. But it slams down, and it does enormous damage. If you look at the tooltips there, we're reading over 3k already if you hit someone low. So it's a lot like the Thief's Heartseeker in that it does more the lower your target is. And the chill field it leaves at the end has some nice synergy as far as combo fields go with the skill 4. So you can use the 5 and then the 4 afterwards and get icy bolts coming out. In fact, I'll show you what that looks like. Here, we'll use the 5, which killed the beetle there. But you see we're getting the chilling bolts proccing because we're doing it in our field there. Or you might want to do it in a different order. It's kind of up to you. There's synergies you get with chill we'll talk about in a second with our traits. So there you go. That's what the Death Shroud looks like now, or that's how Reaper Shroud kind of feels. Is extremely strong, very spiky as far as its pressure goes. You're doing like lots of significant chunks of damage for this period of time, and then once you're out, you're kind of, you know, forced back to your regular skills. Speaking of, we've also got the Greatsword, which you've seen I've had equipped the entire time. So let's deal with these skills. They'll be a lot easier to demonstrate since we're not locked to the profession mechanic. Starting off with the auto, which also, just like Shroud, has its own chain. So we have got Dusk Strike into Fading Twilight into Chilling Scythe. So we hit people in front of us, hit them again, and then on the third attack, you see I swing my greatsword over my shoulder here, and when we swing over our shoulder, we infuse it with an icy magic that chills. So you see that in our new Shroud and on our auto attacks with the greatsword, we do have chill applications, and chill's a big thing with Reaper. That lets us keep close to them and gives us other synergies, as I said. The other thing about this too is just like all other Necromancer auto attacks, this is giving you life force, all right? Little bit, and then a lot. So I really like the way that the auto attack chain is designed on this. I always really like when the third attack on the auto chain is the really distinct one. And so you see here, you get 5 times as much life force on that final hit, and the chill on that final hit, and it does a lot more damage. Each subsequent hit goes up and up and up. If you pause the video and look at the numbers there, you'll see. So, yeah, just a very good, strong auto-attack chain that nonetheless is quite slow. Also cleaves 3 targets in front of you, just like the old Dervish Scythe. So you got that. Next you have Gravedigger, sorry. Gravedigger is a kind of a weird skill, honestly, that I might have expected the devs to have changed a while ago. But, hey, so Gravedigger, this is what it looks like. We spin around in front of us. And what this does is this hits everyone around us, all right? So it's a 5-target cleave, which is pretty nice. Perform a huge swing that deals heavy damage. Recharges faster if it hits someone below half health or who's in down state whatsoever, okay? So if I grave dig this guy, you'll see we go on the full 6-second cooldown, and it's a while before we can grave dig again. We did a ton of damage in that one hit, though. Now that I've got it back, and I use it to him when he's below half health, it's instantly there again. So, I mean, on paper, I think this sounds like such a fun skill, and I remember being very excited about this when it was first revealed to the player base. But the idea being, we're probably going to get CC'd here unless I'm quite careful. The idea being that, you know, you can engage with it, and then your job is to try and get your enemy to half health. Then you can grave dig them again, and kind of keep going, you know. And you hopefully don't miss when they're below 50% health. So who are actually getting hit really hard by these guys? Let's go into Shroud and clear them out. The idea being that basically when your enemy's low, this is your new auto attack, all right? So we do 4k, and then we can hit him again, 3k, and we can hit him again, 8k, and we can hit him again. 4k, you know, and we can keep going like this. It becomes your new auto. As far as PvE is concerned, though, it's a bit of a weird skill in that it's kind of boring just spamming 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, 2. For the competitive modes where people can dodge and where blinds are much more of a thing and blocks are much more of a thing and just maneuverability, suddenly Gravedigger becomes really interesting design. But for PvE, it's led the kit to be in a clunky place where either below 50%, you're just spamming this always, or, you know, you kind of have 2 separate rotations. I don't know. There's different philosophies on how you may feel about it. I like the flavor, the name of it and whatnot. The animation's certainly very cool. But yeah, a really big hit. The other thing about this as well is as we spin around, as you're noticing, it is a whirl too. So if we put a well under us, we can get leeching bolts. It's actually 3 whirls at once, I think. In fact, let's have a look at this. So I'm going to drop a well of a corrosive poison cloud right at my feet. And now I'm going to use this. Yeah, oh, it's 5 actually, because it's 5 targets, right? So we actually get 5 poison bolts coming out of that. If I do that in a dark field, what you'll find is we get 5 life leech as well, which increases the damage does even more and allows us to sustain ourselves. Without even needing to go into blood magic or whatnot. Moving on to the skill 3, we have Death Spiral. I really don't like the name of this because when I think Death Spiral and Reaper, I think the Shroud ability. I think this should be Death Spiral, but this is Soul Spiral. The Greatsword has Death Spiral. Conjure a drill of dark energy on your blade and rend the armor of foes in front of you. Deal increased damage to foes above the health threshold. So this actually got buffed a lot over the recent year or so. Here's what it looks like. We'll use it on this beetle. We kind of stick our greatsword out in front of us and spin it around. I guess maybe a bit like a chainsaw is the idea. And as we do so, we actually stack 12 vulnerability all on our own. So in situations in the game where vulnerability is relevant, what that means is you do a lot more damage. Basically, what you can do with this is open up on your enemy with a death spiral, which does more damage because they're at high health and the fight just started, putting a ton of vulnerability on them, which then gets you ready for Gravedigger very quickly afterwards. Gravedigger is better when they're low. Death Spiral is better when they're high. I'll show you what this looks like as well, just here. The other thing about Death Spiral that's really nice is it's excellent for generating Shroud, okay? So, yes, you get Shroud on the auto attack, and often that's like it really, what you'll find on your kit. But for the Reaper, you get an additional way of getting Shroud too. One of the reasons it's so strong. It's really important you can regenerate Shroud on the Reaper because it drains so quickly and so much of your damage is bound to your F1. There's Mordrum spawning and running off. So here, for example, if I wait here... Well, look, we'll just engage, right? We'll use Executioner's Scythe. We'll go into the Soul Spiral here. We'll give ourselves stability and blind him. Now we'll leave. We're at 50%. If I use my skill 3, the Soul Spiral, we actually charge our Shroud up a bit more. And that's more reliable than waiting for the 3rd auto in the chain, you know, that might get interrupted or mitigated in some way. So just an excellent thing to engage on. You run in at the start of a fight, you have no Shroud, no nothing. You do extra damage, you give yourself life force, you vulnerability them, and you're on your way. Really nice skill. I always open with this. Next, let's look at Nightfall. So, when it really comes down to it, for the game, and competitively speaking as well right now, the first 3 skills of the Greatsword are very slow and can be quite clunky and quite tricky. You know, they're not as high impact as you'd quite like. The skill 4 and 5 are obscenely strong. And in fact, probably the strongest one on the entire Greatsword is this here. It's called Nightfall. Beautiful name for a skill, obviously. Didn't come with Path of Fire in Nightfall. It actually came with Heart of Thorns here. That was the name of one of the campaigns from the original game. Call down a growing column of shadows that damages and conditions foes every pulse. Now, what does it mean, conditions? It means cripple. So cripple is excellent because you've got a lot of chill anyway. So getting the cripple on there means you can double the 2 conditions up and you're in a perfect position to just keep grinding people down with your Shroud and stuff, right? So having cripple's awesome, but blind. This is a pulsing blind field. So strong at protecting you, keeping you safe. So here, I'll show you what it looks like on this beetle. It drops, it's blinding him, and look at how it grows. Look at how big this AoE becomes. That's like bigger than a well at the end there, you see? And we blind and blind and blind and blind. This beetle happens to be a creature that hits us very fast. But, this thing gets very big. It's a really fun skill in terms of counterplaying and, you know, playing against because you know when it gets dropped that it's going to get bigger and bigger. I love this idea of expanding at AoEs that this expansion played with quite a lot. And so you see here. The other obscenely strong thing about it is not only is it blinding and crippling every pulse, but it also converts enemy boons into conditions. And for if you are going into the competitive mode, this is what really pushes it way over the line. What this means is this fears people if they have stability on them. It rips their Aegis and turns it into burning. It turns their protection into vulnerability. It just gives you an enormous amount of quality of life, and you'll find you condition the hell out of people very quickly. There have been some interesting metas in the past for PvE, where you've even had, like, Condition Reapers utilizing this just to get extra condies and stuff out, which is really kind of funny. But it's a beautiful skill, and it's on a super low cooldown as well, for as strong as it is, in my opinion, of 20 seconds. It's its own combo field as well, and it's a dark field. So, everything I said with the whirls in your shrouds, with the Gravedigs, you can life leech, right, while you're in it. And so a lot of people like to use the chilling bolts from the Executioner's Strike, but I actually like the dark field. And you see here, just by being a Reaper running the Greatsword, you've got access to the two really prominent fields. It's great. Moving on to the skill 5, again, this is a really good quality of life skill. This is called Grasping Darkness. So what have we done? We've got cripples, we've got chills, we've got a gap closer in Death's Charge. Well, what about a pull as well? This is our final way, major way, that we keep enemies with us so we can continue unloading our melee damage. Grasping Darkness. Conjure Claws. We're going to kill these guys just so that we can read the skill in peace and show you guys what it looks like without them around. We'll blow up this beetle here. I can't believe I aggroed this beetle. He was stood all the way over there. Was it that other player nearby made it run over to me? I mean, it spawns all the way over there. So, Grasping Darkness. Conjure Claws of Darkness from the shadows to attack foes, applying a condition to them and pulling them to you. Gain life force for everyone struck. So even more life force. You get chill. And so here's what we see. You get these three. It's like there's a claw under the earth that grabs towards. I love the art on this. And each, like, finger of that claw, as you saw it pull towards me, is its own, like, actual thing with its own collision that seeks to target an enemy and pull them in. So it's kind of an outward cone in front of you. If a player is really near you, this might quite easily miss. So if we've got this beetle, I say player, if anything's near you. If I use Grasping Darkness here, you know, I can miss the beetle. But if the beetle is quite far away from me and I'm trying to chase it down in any of these positions, suddenly it's really easy to grab it in because, you know, you get the 3 different fingers here. And yes, each one does damage, good damage, gives you life force and chill. So not only have you just pulled a person in with this, but you've chilled them at the same time, so they can't run away that easily, all right? So that was kind of beautiful. He knocked us down right as we went into Shroud, which was good. It meant we just drained a ton of life force without getting any value out of it. So yeah, Greatsword is just a fantastic skill on the opening. What you'll find you often do is you use Grasping Darkness to pull someone in, dropping a Nightfall so that they're now getting blinded in it. Then you use your skill 3 to give them the vulnerability and stuff. And then you can Gravedig spam them down. And you could do that to a whole group of enemies as well, because you're pulling multiple things in at once. It'll be a while before you even get to using the autos. Just using these higher power things on the right is kind of where it's all at. Then, if they're still alive after all of that, you've got the main game, which is your Shroud. Now, we've just gone over 2 full weapon sets here. And if you're new to Reaper, you might be wondering, okay, well, how do they, like, balance? How do they compare? Definitely, while you're in Shrouds, you've got the more impactful, weighty things for any kind of, like, balanced scenario. But Greatsword itself, like, is excellent at setting up and can do good damage in its own right as well. It's a tricky thing to talk about because there have been PvE metas where you're in a team scenario where other people give you all the boons and all the might, and there's not really many mechanics to focus on. And then in terms of raw damage, maybe it is better to just stay in Greatsword for this patch, and then maybe it's possibly worth going to Shroud. Over the years, Shroud, as far as PvE has been concerned, well, all mechanics and sense in the game is eliminated. Shroud has not been good enough in terms of raw damage, which has led Reaper to have a bit of an unfair reputation, where people think it's weaker than it is. But you put this thing into any balanced scenario, where you're providing your own boons, you're providing your own incapacitating stuff, or you're in the competitive modes, World versus World, PvP, all of a sudden, the rest of the kit starts to shine, and you realize it is a monster in terms of its sturdiness and in terms of its damage output potential. So, that's the meat of it. Now let's look at the potatoes. We're going to look at the new utility skill type. So, returning to the first trait, Shroud Knight. Yes, we gain access to shouts. So, shouts before were only available on the warrior and the Guardian, and the Ranger, and they were kind of different on all of them. Shouts for the Reaper have their own little twist as well, I guess, for when Heart of Thorns came out. They're shouts, but with cast times, okay? So I've got them all loaded in here. We've got a heal shout, Your Soul Is Mine. You see, it's got a bit of a cast time. Corrosive Poison Field isn't a shout. This one here, You Are All Weaklings. This one's instant activation. Suffers instant activation. Nothing Can Save You has a cast time. Chill to the Bone as a cast time. But the other thing you'll notice is these are shouts that do damage. And that wasn't a thing for the Ranger. That wasn't a thing for the Guardian or the Warrior. They were more about buffing your pet or your allies and, you know, stuff like that. But these are more offensive in nature. Here we have a heal skill that actually does do a packet of damage. I have the shouts traded as well right now, so let's turn that off so we can look at them in their raw forms. So, yeah, let's go through Your Soul Is Mine. I'll activate this. Your soul is mine. There you go. Heal yourself, gain life force, and strike foes around you, absorbing additional life force from each foe struck. So I don't actually like this very much. I've never really found too much usage out of it. It's a bit like the Elementalist Arcane Brilliance in a way, in that the heal you actually get from this is not that high. The way that you get a lot of value out of this is by having a ton of targets around you to really chunk up a ton of life force. But even then, you might already have high Shroud and you want to heal anyway before going into Shrouds. And now you've lost all the extra life force value because you can't, like, overcap on life force. So that sometimes screws it up. And the damage on it is more of a flavor thing than anything else. It really doesn't mean enough. We will come to... I'll talk about the trait as well now, actually, I guess. So one of the traits, and we'll do a proper spotlight, but is the shout trait. It's called Augury of Death. Again, it's an assassin thing from Guild Wars 1. Shouts gain reduced recharge, siphon health, and gain additional recharge reduction for every foe they hit. So when you trait, already this was giving us more life force per target. So I'll show you what this looks like. We'll grab this beetle, then we'll grab this one. Already we were getting more life force per target, but now with the trait, we get additional recharge reduction on top of what was already reduced just from picking the trait up for having more targets, right? So if I use this and I hit 2 enemies, we just capped out our life force, and in 13 seconds, it will be back. You see it got chunked down like that. So there is kind of a dream scenario where you run the trait and you have a lot of targets. Suddenly this is pretty good, but to me it's just not consistent enough. I have no doubt that in the dream scenario it suddenly becomes the best Necromancer heal, but I think it's just that low packet of heal and the baseline packet of heal on there that's supposed to be supplemented by the life force that just feels a bit off and clunky now with the way that you rapidly spend this and bring it back up and rapidly spend it now. It just doesn't feel like it's there. But that general concept with shouts cooling down really quickly when you have a ton of targets goes through all of these. And that's kind of a thing with Reaper. The devs, when they were originally designing it, were talking about a lot that this was supposed to be a melee build that scaled the more targets it had. The more enemies that are around, the more the Reaper is happy. Okay, so you want to wade into packets of lots of foes wherever they're possible in PvE. You want to fight against Spirit Rangers of the day or Minion Mancers or, you know, environments like that are where you're really meant to be shining. And shouts play into that a lot. So there's the heal. I'm lukewarm on it. Next, You Are All Weaklings. You are all weaklings. Instant activation. Damage all foes around you. And you'll see the damage is still extremely low, just like the heal. So you kind of don't want to think about that much. Gain boons. Inflict conditions on foes and gain boons per foe struck. So basically what this is we hurt people a bit, then a bit more because we have the trait for the lifesteal. We put weakness out on them, and weakness is a very strong condition, and that lasts for a long time. And we gain might. So the more targets we have, we get to give ourselves an awful lot of might here. So we got 2 guys over here. We cast this on them. We weaken, we lifesteal. It starts cooling down quicker. And it's a nice idea for a skill, but in general, it's kind of terrible. You have easier ways of accessing might for yourself on this build, on this elite specialization. We'll talk about soon. Much easier. You also are likely to have a long duration weakness removed, and it's just not got enough impact. Only might and weakness on the skill. The stun break, yes, is a thing, I guess, but it's just not good enough. For a lot of these shouts, they're actually quite underwhelming on the Reaper. And I think one of the main ways the devs could improve them is buffing that damage idea. Just, you know, the flat packet on it. If you just improve that, maybe suddenly it would be more interesting. I think that's quite in line with Reaper as a spec. But yeah, I don't really like You Are All Weaklings just because you can do this stuff without dedicating a whole utility to it. There's much better stuff you could run. Next, we got Suffer. You see there? It looks very similar, except you get that blue tint to it. Damage foes around you and chill them. Transfer conditions to each foe you strike. So, condition manipulation is a very necromancer-y thing. It's not really the forte of the Reaper, but you get a bit of it on there. And again, I don't like this skill. The damage is higher on this for some reason. But it's just not good enough. Now, it's chill application, and we always like chill application, but it's probably not got the range it needs for it. It doesn't have the damage, and the idea of the condition transferal, like, oh, I'd run this if I'm facing a lot of condition pressure. There are way better utilities on Necromancer to deal with that than running this. The problem is, if you only have one target, this is only going to transfer one condition. So if you're fighting an Awakened in Path of Fire, and it puts a ton of conditions on you, you want to transfer a ton of conditions back to him, not a single bit of cripple, while all the torment and bleeds and things are lasting on you. So that having the dream scenario where you're really heavily conditioned and also you have a ton of enemies around you. Here's the other thing. When you're transferring a condition, you're doing it, yes, to cleanse yourself, but you're also doing it because you want to kill the person with the conditions. But this will splash them out to a whole group, so you don't really get to spike someone down, similar to how you do with, say, Plague Signet, or if you're running a staff and you use the skill 4 and whatnot. So it's just not a very good skill. I think that the conditions that are transferred here needs to go up to like 3 per target. Then maybe you'd start looking at it a bit more. And it would be interesting, but it's not very good. Next, Nothing Can Save You. And you'll notice each shout is like... It's a good idea behind each shout because they're all like a tech choice. Weakness, stop flat damage against you. Here you've got chill and you've got stop condition damage against you. Here, we've got Nothing Can Save You.
Nothing can save you.
So we get a cast time this time, and you'll notice it's given me a buff. Unblockable. What does it say? Damage foes around you, converting their boons into vuln. Your attacks become unblockable for a short time, and the duration increases based on the number of foes struck. So this here is your big damage setup skill. You hit someone with this, and now they can't do anything to mitigate the damage coming up. They can dodge roll, but if they're blocking in any way, you break through that. And in truth, there are some blocking enemies in PvE that you can sometimes swap this on for if you know that they're going to be coming up and you're going to be fighting them. If you anticipate a bit of block, you can totally throw this on, and it's nice on demand. This is particularly potent because if I do this, I hit 2 guys, I've got 6 seconds of unblockable, and now I go into Shroud. And having unblockable Shroud, like, that's lunacy. That is so strong. So it's a very cool idea. But the duration generally isn't very low. It's got that same problem where it's most effective if you can scale it off of a lot of targets. You do Boon Rip as well and apply vulnerability. So it's kind of a lot like your Death Spiral, you know. It's like your big setup. Maybe you're not running Greatsword and you want to use this as a big setup. And because it makes you unblockable in some ways, it's more potent. But again, this is one I frequently come back to because I love it on paper. But I always end up underwhelmed and would rather spend this utility slot on some quality of life, like a spectral skill that gives me more life force so I can get back into Shroud more frequently, as well as teleporting me around or pulling people and whatnot. So, yeah, Nothing Can Save You. I think it's got the makings of a good skill, but it's currently not a very good skill. It just needs a bit more. Last but not least, there is Rise. This is a bit of an outlier, and when Heart of Thorns was coming out, I actually dedicated a whole video to this. It's a Minionmancer skill. Now, Reaper isn't really about Minionmancy. And I would anticipate we'll get another elite specialization in the future that really is. But the devs threw a bit of it in there. So Shout, damage foes around you. And this is the most of all of them in terms of the flat damage. Summon a Shambling Horror plus additional horrors near each enemy you strike. Shambling Horrors are minions that take damage from you as long as they are attacking. So it's really weird. I'll show you what the Shambling Horror looks like here against this beetle. We'll run over. And this is a really fun idea for a minion skill. So we get one guaranteed. He's summoned next to me, as you can see there. And we get another one summoned on our target. You can see he's there. And now they start attacking. And for as long as they're attacking, we have this buff here. A portion of incoming damage is being transferred to one of our minions. So if someone strikes me, they eat the pressure anyway. The problem, you can already see. They're very squishy. Also, the fact that this buff only rolls while they're attacking means, well, there it dipped off just after they died, means that it's not actually consistent enough. It's a really fun idea for a skill in terms of how you actually summon creatures. It's very Guild Wars 1-y in that you know, the more target, it scales and you can build a lot. You know, I like the idea of massing a ton of stuff as a minion monster. And, well, you kind of get to do that there. Here, I've summoned 4 minions. If I run death magic, I gain extra toughness for them. They'll steal condies for me and stuff. And I can cap that with other things. This is actually probably my favorite minion skill in the game. But, again, if I want to reduce damage I take, I'd rather pick up protection on demand from, like, spectral armor or something. I've never really found that my sturdiness goes up enough with this. They also die really quickly now. This was nerfed a while ago. It used to be that if you had 5 of them up and then you cast it again, you'd get another 5, and then you get another. And if you had people healing them, you could have them up indefinitely. The video I made was summoning a whole army of shambling horrors, and it was very cool, but the devs nerfed that. You know, it's just such a beautiful minion idea in terms of, think about this with the trait, right? Like, you hit a load of targets, so you get extra minions, and it cools down quicker, so you get even more extra minions. It's perfect, but they're all dying in unison too quickly, and you don't have enough capacity to keep them alive. You get some with, like, blood magic, because you can make them life leech with their attacks in blood magic, but sadly, it just doesn't mesh with the rest of Reaper right now. And I really do mean sadly, because this exists on Reaper, it's unlikely to exist on a Minion Mancy elite spec in the future, and it's just such a perfect idea for a minion skill to me. So yeah, it really comes down to the Shambling Horrors, and there you can see I'm lukewarm about every single shout I've said. Well, what about the elite? The elite is amazing. The elite is incredible. I very rarely ever run a Reaper build without the elite, and the elite is so good that often I run the shout trait even if I'm not running a single other shout skill on my bar. Like a standard setup I might have in PvE might look like this, right? Spectral Grasp to chill people and pull them in. It's a lot like getting Greatsword 5 again, and also a ton of life force. Increase my power, a well that does ridiculous damage, and I might have this, and I'll still take the shout trait just for the elite, because it cools down so quick when you have the trait if you can hit a lot of targets, which is easy to do in PvE. Shout. Freeze all enemies around you, inflicting conditions on them, the condition being chill, who would have thought, and you gain boons for everyone you freeze. The boon is stability. So check this out. We have a big cast on it. It's easy to counterplay in PvP. You can cancel cast it to stall the animation and do fun things like that, so it's really fun to play with in that way. But everyone around us gets stunned, and we all know how strong stun is, for 2 seconds. Not only that, but everyone we hit grants us stability. So if you pop this on enough targets, you're going to give yourself like 10 stab for like a good long while. And that stab can allow you to get all your greatsword stuff out. Then you can dip into Shroud still with the stab from the elite on you. And then finally you can use Infusing Terror and Terrify afterwards. It's so good. The elite is excellent for interrupting all kinds of different key things you want. It's also low enough cooldown, again, when you trait it. It's got good synergy with various runes that have on elite procs. Just truly fantastic. I'll show you the animation of it actually hitting a target as well. Essentially what it does is it kind of creates a block of ice on the target, a bit like from Svanir runes and Ice Block and things that you may remember from back in the day. So I'll show you guys that. And yeah, truly, truly beautiful elite. One of the coolest things in the whole Reaper kit. And the way it competes with other stuff is interesting too. Like, you're not really going to use Plague Lands because this is more Condi oriented. You could use Flesh Golem, which is also CC. And, you know, depending on your format, you might prefer this because it might do better damage against big hitbox on their break bars. I don't know. Lich Form is, you know, a pure aggression. And Lich Form's a great idea for an elite, to be honest, on Reaper. But has its own problems, which I guess aren't deserving of a spotlight in this video. But here, so look, if we've aggroed this guy, if we come take this Beetle as well, we'll pull him in. We'll pull this guy in with our Spectral Grasp as well to make sure they're close. So we can pull in people, AoE, and then we can stun them, right? And put a ton of chill on, and the chill buffs us. So really, really nice. This is my favorite of the new skills. And that's kind of Reaper as far as the skills are concerned, guys. The way I'd sum this up is the Shroud, and the Shroud is really good. The Greatsword is pretty good. The Shouts are mediocre, except the Elite. That's my judgment in terms of efficacy. In terms of flavor and styling and thrust, I actually think is very good. All right, let's move on to traits now, shall we? Is this guy attacking us? It looks like he might be. They're very, very greedy, aren't they? Sorry, Beetles. We'll do our next introducing on a different area of the map so that we don't have so many creatures. Let's look at traits. Reaper. Starting off with the miners. Well, first of all, we got Death Knight, which gives us shouts and the new Shroud. Next, we have Shivers of Dread, and you'll start to see why we care so much about Chill. It's obviously for the impact that Chill slows people down, and we can stay with them, but there's other synergies here. Whenever we inflict fear, we also inflict Chill now. So that counts for anything. If I now, as a Reaper, equip a staff, which looks like a scythe, very fitting, isn't it, right? If I equip this staff and I use my Reaper's Mark, right? This is core Necromancer stuff, but if I use this, I chill him. If I go into Death Shroud and I Terrify, I also chill him, all right? So, if you're a very low-level Reaper and you're just starting out in Heart of Thorns, you won't get that synergy because you have to train deep enough to unlock the Miner. But as soon as the Miner's there, yeah, you get that for any form of chill on the entire class. So, if you're running the Fear Wall Spectral skill, no matter what it is, you've also got the chill rolling out. It's an interesting anti-synergy as well because when you fear someone, the idea of fear is to, you know, CC them, but also to get them to run away from you. But with Reaper, you kind of don't want to create a gap anymore, do you? If you fear someone, you want to attack them while they're running away. You know, that's free damage. You don't want them sprinting a mile away and you've just, like, screwed yourself over by fearing. So this is actually a really smart idea for a trait on the Reaper classification because now, if I ever fear through anything, I'll never, like, regret using it. Because, look, he's chilled, so I can keep hitting him while he's running away. You know, or if I have a longer duration fear, if I trait for longer duration fears and stuff. And that's kind of the idea there, that you'll never be disappointed about your fear. And the chill itself will have its own benefits, which we see here. Cold Shoulder. This is the other minor. All Reapers have this. Chill lasts longer. So that's chill from anywhere in the game, like our mark here, the Chill Blains. They now last longer. And chilled foes take more damage from your attacks. And that's why you kind of care so much. When we use Greatsword 5, we buff our damage. When we use Death Spiral, we put 12 vulnerability on and buff our damage even more. And now all of a sudden, Gravedigger hits really hard. That's why some people in here go Executioner Strike, then into Soul Spiral, because this field means that they do extra damage with all their other abilities. That's why they like the Chilling Bolts that come from that field. Cold Shoulder is extremely strong. And yeah, it's maintaining chill is now super, super good as long as you're a Reaper. That's the miners. Now let's look at the top line. So it used to be that the 3 lines, it's a little bit muddy now, but it used to be that the 3 lines, one of them was to make you like a really slow-moving movie monster that you didn't move very much yourself, but once you got close, you had so much stuff to keep your enemy incapacitated and so much heavy damage, you'd rip them to pieces. One of the lines was being about like a ridiculous like rampaging Onslaught monster that's just very, very, very aggressive and very glassy, essentially, but does a load of damage, all right? And then the last line was kind of like, I don't know, a bit of a mix, I guess. So it's a little bit messier now, but here, let's have a look. So at the top, we've got the Shout trait. Well, let's go rung by rung, actually. Let's do it this way. So rung by rung, you've got Shouts, which I've already shown off very clearly. Or you have this, Chilling Nova. Chill, critical hits against a chilled foe causes an explosion that then chills everyone nearby. Chilling Nova is an extremely powerful trait that lots of Reapers run, and I don't blame them. So you see now when I used my skill 5, Grasping Darkness, we chilled him as we pulled him in, and then we crit him with some of the rest of the Grasping Darkness, which exploded, refreshing the chill. There, I used my skill 3, Death Spiral, and we created an explosion of chill around him. So this is really good for those AoE scenarios, you know? You can see how the Greatsword cleaves all these people, right? Oh, there our ability missed. That can happen sometimes, right? So now when I use the 5 and the Spiral, look at this extra explosion. The extra explosion only reads at 700 damage there, but it can crit. It does a lot of damage, and it procs very frequently. Every 8 seconds, refreshing more chill, keeping more Cold Shoulder up, and whatever other synergies you've got going. Very, very, very strong. Probably the best in slot here for most scenarios. Next, you have Relentless Pursuit. You know, that bottom-themed line of just a guy that's constantly aggressing. Reduce the duration of movement-impairing conditions that are on you, and you get even further reduction if you're in Shroud. So, just always, if I get crippled, it runs out quicker, 33% quicker. If I'm in Shroud, it runs out 66% quicker, which is kind of the idea of you cannot slow me down. I will chase and chase and chase and chase. This trait's all right, But just like everywhere across the board in Guild Wars 2 where a trait like this exists, I'm always a bit underwhelmed by it. It also has a bit of anti-synergy and weirdness with Soul Reaping, because Soul Reaping gives you Speed of Shadows, which just straight up cleanses when you go into Shroud and gives you swiftness when you're in Shroud. And I would never really want to run both together, I don't think. You can, obviously. But there's just a bit of anti-synergy there, I think, because you spike in and out of Shroud enough that I don't know about Relentless Pursuit these days. It's still very good, though. Next rung. We've got back up here with the Shout trait did Lifesteal, remember? Well, this one does Lifesteal as well. Yeah, the top one is like about regenerating you a bit more through Life Leech and other mechanics, okay? So next we got Soul Eater. This is your Greatsword trait. Greatsword skills gain reduced recharge. They periodically heal you and gain life force while you're wielding it. Only in combat. So, here what I'll do is I will attack this beetle. Or I'll stand near him so he hits us. And what you'll see is I'm getting green ticks on me. 200, 200, 200, 200. That's just from wielding the Greatsword here. And I'm also slowly ticking up life force. So you're kind of like double healing because life force counts as health as well. So this is kind of like running the Death Signet. That also regenerates your life force passively. Realistically, the number is very low. Necro is a high vitality class, so regeneration effects can feel kind of unimpactful. Also, the interval on this here in PvE is 1 second. I think in PvP it is 3. So it's not quite as good over there, I don't think. The one thing that this trait does have going for it, though, is the cooldown reduction, because it reduces Nightfall. Dropping Nightfall's cooldown to 20 seconds... Essentially what that means is, in terms of the flow of the class, and I can't really demonstrate that here in this video, but you have to take my word for it. In terms of the class, as you weapon swap and stuff, what you'll notice there is I used my Greatsword skills, I went into Shroud, used those, came out of Shroud, weapon swapped. That's kind of a standard thing you'll do. Now you'll use these. When I weapon swap back, my Nightfall is instantly available. If I didn't have the trait, it wouldn't be. But having this freely, instantly available next set of blinds and converts and corrupts and stuff is life-saving. And that's the real perk of this. The cooldown reduction doesn't affect the auto. Doesn't really matter too much for Gravedigger, since below 50 it's instant recharge, and above 50 it's pretty quick anyway. It doesn't really affect Soul Spiral too much. Grasping Darkness it does as well, but really it's about Nightfall. And I actually really like this trait. I think generally undervalued by the community. And this is great in PvE as well. What I just described there is all very PvE relevant. You know, if you're still in the fight, that will blind the next wave of beetles that have just charged in on you. If they're not dead already, that is. Next, we have Chillin Victory. So this is a really good sturdy trait. There's kind of a weird conflict here because you regenerate with Soul Reaper, and then this one kind of regenerates you too. Chilling Victory, if you hit someone who's chilled, grant yourself might and life force. So you see the idea here. This middle line's all about chill. That's what it is. I could have said that earlier. So basically, we hit them, we crit them and explode chills around. We hit them while they're chilled, and we start giving ourselves might. So do you remember I said the Shroud? Sorry, did you remember I said the Shout thing? And oh, there's other ways to get might? Well, here you go. Every second, you can give yourself more might and more life force, just as long as you're hitting someone who's chilled. And believe me, they will be chilled if you've taken this middle line, right? Because you're bouncing so much more of it around. There's not much more to say there, except for the fact that... so here we're, immediately CC'd. There's not much more to say, aside from this will start increasing your damage massively, because you can chain so much might on yourself. You see that both of these traits are giving you life force. This one will always give you life force as long as there's chill. This one gives you life force as long as you're on a greatsword. So this one disables when you go into Shroud. This one disables when you weapon swap. But this one can keep working for you. And so in general, I think Chilling Victory is largely the community's favorite, especially with another synergy we'll talk about in a second. Last but not least, you've got Decimate Defenses. This one is excellent for PvE. Striking a foe with vulnerability increases your crit chance. 2% per stack. That's massive. In PvE, it's really easy to put a ton of vuln out. Really easy. Here, immediately, we get 12 vuln on Death Spiral. What does this mean, guys? This means if I run this trait and I Death Spiral, I've just increased my crit chance by 24%. That's so much precision. It's mind-blowing, right? So you can easily, as a Reaper, put yourself to 100% crit chance. You see how everything there was critting? He interrupted me in the middle because I didn't use my skill 3. You could so easily do it via Decimate Defenses. It means you sacrifice the quality of life that comes from these two, but this is the main thing you find in PvE. Don't forget, this is on the Necromancer class as well, which has other ways of buffing crit chance, such as this here, Death Perception. Gain 33% increased crit chance while we're in Shroud. So while I'm in Shroud and they have vulnerability, it's so easy to have 100% crit. For that reason, an interesting thing to do in PvE for your gear is actually you don't have to run Zerk or Assassin, certainly, or many of these other things. You can actually run Valkyrie, which is what I've been demonstrating here in this video, which is power and vitality, not precision, with your ferocity. And what that means is you get extra health. And extra health means you get more life force. More life force means you're tankier while you're in Shroud. You get double value out of vitality on a Reaper, on a Necromancer. And so, as a Reaper, you can run this. You can very comfortably run it. And it makes your life in open world even better. So just a truly extraordinary trait. That's not your only vulnerability, obviously. There, as I killed that beetle, you saw I went up to 17. You get other stuff, say, through the Spite line, which is all about flat pressure. Spite is a natural pair for Reaper, but just because it's themed around so many of the same ideas in terms of, you know, doing flat damage and incapacitating people, right? We won't do a big highlight on Spite, obviously. I'll talk about another synergy in a second there. So there you go. You got the second rung there. And finally, onto the third rung. So remember, the top line has been about kind of regenerating and life forcey stuff and life steal. Well, here we get Blighter's Boon. So the 3 Grandmasters, you got a Grandmaster that's about being a really sustainy, kind of difficult to shake off monster. There's going to be another Grandmaster that's all about crazy damage, and there's going to be a Grandmaster about chill. So starting with this one, Blighter's Boon, gain life force when you apply a boon to yourself. If you are in Reaper's Shroud, gain health instead. Now this might sound really unassuming and uninteresting, but it's an extremely strong Grandmaster trait, one of my favorite ones in the entire game. You'll notice there is no cooldown on that. So Guild Wars 2 is a game where you can spam a lot of boons around. And you can certainly do that on Reaper as well. Remember this might we were talking about here? Every second you can give yourself might. Well, why not do that? Remember we were talking about Spite? Well, every time we auto-attack in Spite, while we're in Shroud, we give ourselves might. Every time we give ourselves might through one of these, we give ourselves health or life force. Up here, if you go Spite, you can run Spiteful Spirit. This gives you retail every time when you go into Shroud. And the more targets you hit in Shroud, the more retail you give, which is healing, which is more healing, which is more healing. You can run Awaken the Pain here, which is when you go into Shroud, give yourself 5 might. Which means when I go into Shroud here, I heal myself 5 times. Just from going in, alright? 6 times, actually, because of the Spiteful Spirit proc as well, right? And then as we auto. So basically what Blighter's Boon means is, and hopefully I can demonstrate this, while you're out of Shroud, you gain it really quickly because you do all this stuff that gives you boons. You see these boons? You see all this life force I'm getting? You gain you gain life force really quickly when you have none. And then if you're in a fight for your life, right? Let's say we're fighting a PvE boss right now and this beetle is super dangerous and he's getting us killed, right? When we're losing all of our health here, we're building life force. Then we're going to have 100% life force and we're going to go into Shroud. And the stability heals us as well. And in Shroud, we bring our health back up. Do you understand what I'm saying? It yo-yos. It's, okay, well, we've got loads of Shroud. We heal ourselves up. Then while we're using our health bar, we're building our Shroud bar back up, right? So you dip in and out of them, and each sustains the other. As long as you're giving yourself boons. So here we're rebuilding our life force. Now we're in here, we're rebuilding our health. And you get so much health, right? Because every attack is giving you all of this might and stuff. Right? Blighter's Boon is awesome. The idea of it is so pure and perfect. Efficacy-wise as well, it's extremely strong. If you combo this with like blood magic stuff where you're giving yourself protection on wells and whatnot, you're taking, you know, chilling Nova here as well. You get chill into more chill, into might, into heals. Fantastic. And it means that some Reaper builds, if you set them up correctly, through Blighter's Boon specifically, can be ultra sturdy. There's like cool PvE food that gives you might every time you attack, or chill when it's night. Beautiful. Okay, so that's the top Grandmaster. Let's look at the next. This is probably my least favorite thing about the entire specialization, and I don't have much positive to say about it. It's called Deathly Chill. Remember, the middle line has been all about chill. Well, this is too. This is now chill deals damage over time. When Heart of Thorns first came out, what it meant was that chill became a damaging condition, and it did a lot of damage too. It was really fun and flavorful. But what it meant was, out of everything I've said in this video, how much has been about conditions? And condition damage specifically. We apply a lot of conditions, but none of them are offensive conditions. There's no random bleeds out there. There's no poison. There's no torment. There's no burning unless we choose to do it by picking up Doomfire. And now, as we swing with our autos, we apply burning on there, right? Reaper itself has nothing to do with condition damage. And yet they gave it a Grandmaster that had a Condi thing. And what did this mean? It meant for a long time after Reaper came out at the start of Heart of Thorns, Reapers did not get to play any differently to how they'd been all the way through core, which was conditions. They stayed on Condi builds. Because guess what was the best of the pick of the litter? Deathly Chill. It was an awful, awful idea. I like the idea of the trait, chill does damage, but it scales with power. I think that would have been fantastic. Instead of that, when the devs eventually nerfed it, and they did, and now we do think of power, rightly so, as more... Reaper now, rightly so, as more of a power thing. When they nerfed it, they just turned it into Deathly Chill. It turns into bleeds. So, this means it's, like, easier to cleanse, because it's all going into the same stack. But it just feels totally out of place now. What I think that should be is chill does damage, but it should not be as a condition it does damage. It just it should be that it scales off of your power stat. A bit like Greatsword Guardians with their binding blades or whatever. And then it could be really fun, and you'd have a distinct chill line, and you'd wonder whether you use it. But unfortunately, it's an oddball. I don't like it. I never have. In terms of efficacy, I'm sure it's got a lot of fans, because most players of this game only care about what's good. But in terms of design, I think it's ridiculous. Last but not least, you've got Reaper's Onslaught. This one's ultra fun, and probably it is very newly implemented the way it now is during the Path of Fire days. This one is all about damage. It's not about sustain. It's not about chill. It's about damage. And boy, does it deliver it. Reaper's Onslaught. Gain ferocity while in Shroud. So first of all, while we're in here, our crits are just hitting harder, making our stuff stronger, which is brilliant. You haven't seen me running this trait all video, by the way, because it's so strong it would just instantly kill all these creatures, and I wouldn't be able to demonstrate anything to you. So we gain a lot more ferocity. You'll notice that that's very similar to Soul Reaping's Death Perception. Look at Death Perception. This is gain increased crit chance and ferocity. So you can get 300 ferocity from curses, from Soul Reaping, sorry, and then another 300 from Reaper's Onslaught, for a total of 600 ferocity from your two Grandmasters. The synergies between these are awesome, because you get the might, you get the deeper Shroud, you get faster recharging Shroud, you can move in it, you know, this is just a beautiful pair. Spite, Soul Reaping, and Reaper is my main recommendation as, like, the Trinity. Maybe you can sub one of them out for Blood Magic. But, yeah, so you get all of this. Death Perception plus Reaper's Onslaught is incredible. You get a load of ferocity, but then you have permanent quickness in Shroud. This is so strong. I'm actually anticipating it being nerfed. I mean, it has to be, surely. It's unbelievable. And so what it means is when I come over to this beetle, I now Executioner's Axe him faster, I Soul Spiral faster, my auto attacks, which do the life reaping, go faster so I can sustain in Shroud faster. The quickness stays on me when I leave Shroud, so I can drop out and then quick cast my elite or quick cast my heal as I leave. Because it's still impacting me after I dip out. And on top of all of that, when you auto-attack in Shroud, it reduces the recharge of other Shroud skills. So I've got to build up some life force here. So let's quickly do that. We'll use Spectral Grasp, then the 3, then we'll use that. Okay, and he dies. So we got 50% Shroud back. So we'll show it off on this Mordrum, all right? So we are going to come in, we're going to waste this, and double tap that as well. Now watch as I attack this guy. It's chunking down the cooldown here. A little bit at a time. It used to be stronger and different. But basically it means, as we stay in Shrouds, we just get access to our other skills as well while we auto, which we'll be doing anyway because we want to stay in Shroud for longer. So that's Reaper's Onslaught. And so, yeah, you could combo that with Decimate Defenses, Relentless Pursuit, and there you have it. That's the Reaper. I really love Reaper. It's actually one of my favorite elite specializations in the whole game. If you look at my second channel, I've got a ton of different games and PvP and examples of actually running this thing in matches. I actually think it's overpowered at the moment, and I think it's one of my favorite things to recommend to new players, certainly too. One of the best, most well-designed, tightly focused Heart of Thorns elite specializations to come out, and there you go. So that's my introduction to it. Hope you guys enjoyed. You now know everything you need to know about Reaper, whether you play it or not, and hopefully you take that knowledge and do something interesting with it. Cheers, guys. I'll see you for another introduction, if we do more, next time.